The blizzard didn't fall so much as it pressed down, sealing the town in a white hush that made every street lamp glow like a coin at the bottom of frozen water. At the far end of Maple Hollow Road, a man in a knit cap and fluorescent vest slowed his pickup as his headlights caught a dark mound in the ditch, too still to be a deer. He rolled past, then stopped anyway, hazard lights blinking red into the storm, and stepped out into air that burned his lungs. The wind shoved at his shoulders, trying to push him back to warmth, but the ditch pulled him forward like a question. On the snowbank beside the pair, he noticed a line of footprints, adult-sized, hurried, half filling with fresh flakes, leading away from the road and into the trees, as if someone fled recently. Snow hissed across the road, while his phone flashlight cut a narrow tunnel through the swirling flakes. That's when the mound moved, just a fraction, and his heart jumped. A dog's head lifted from the drift, black fur dusted white, ears forward, eyes bright and unblinking. Even in the storm, the posture screamed training, steady, anchored, guarding, a police canine. And tucked into the curve of its body, shielded from the wind like the warmest center of a living shelter, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7, hair plastered to her forehead in icy strands, lashes rimed with frost. One mitten was missing. Her other hand was curled in the dog's fur, fingers stiff. The dog didn't growl or lunge. It shifted its weight, bracing wider over her, and the man understood with a jolt that the animal wasn't lost. It was holding the line. "Hey, sweetheart," he tried. But the girl didn't answer, and that silence hit harder than the cold. The canine's eyes flicked to him, then back down the road, scanning and listening as if it knew something was still out there in the white. The man's hands shook as he opened his camera, needing proof that he wasn't hallucinating. The screen wobbled. Snow blurred the edges. In the frame, the K9 was a dark guardian wrapped around a fragile bundle, breath steaming, muscles coiled under calm control. "Little girl found sleeping with police dog in snow," he muttered, naming the moment like a headline. "This can't be real," he whispered, then hit record anyway. The K9 answered with a single sharp bark, one clean, commanding note that cut through the storm like a siren. The man swallowed and jabbed the call button. 911, he gasped, forcing the address out between chattering teeth, eyes locked on the girl's pale face. Behind him, engines whined closer, and red and blue light began to pulse against the low clouds. Sirens rose, urgent and rising, and boots and voices rushed toward the ditch. The video, still recording, caught the K9 lowering its head again, nose pressed to the girl's temple, eyes open, alert, still working as the first cruiser door slammed. 24 hours earlier, Maple Hollow looked like a postcard someone forgot to mail. Main Street quiet, storefronts trimmed with tired garland, and the diner windows glowing amber against early dusk. Inside Rosie's diner, the air carried coffee, fried onions, and cinnamon from the pie case. The kind of warmth that made you unbutton your coat without thinking. Folks nodded at one another, because in a town this size you didn't just recognize faces. You recognized engines, exhaust notes, the way a truck door closed. Even the silence felt familiar. When the bell over the door chimed, conversations didn't stop. They simply shifted, eyes flicking up in the same practiced motion. The man who stepped in didn't make noise about it. He didn't need to. He moved with that restrained, economical confidence that comes from years of taking chaos apart and putting it back in order. The locals called him the vet, in the way people do when they don't know how to fit respect into a sentence, and he answered to it with a small nod, never correcting anyone. His uniform was clean but plain. No flashy patches, no hometown politics stitched into the fabric. He wasn't part of the local power circles, not invited to the back tables where deals lived. But he was the one they looked for when something went wrong and everyone else suddenly had somewhere else to be. At his side, held close on a short lead, was his canine partner, sleek, disciplined, eyes like dark glass that reflected everything and gave nothing away. The dog didn't beg for attention, didn't wag for applause. It stood like a sentry in a room full of sleepy comfort, reading the world in small, precise signals people missed. A waitress started to reach down with a smile, then thought better of it when the dog's gaze slid to her hand and back to the exit. Calm, but absolute. The vet ordered coffee, black, and a bowl of water that the dog didn't touch right away. Instead, the canine angled its head toward the front windows where the light outside had changed. Subtle at first, like someone dimmed the sky. Snow wasn't falling yet, but the air had that metallic bite, the kind that carried a warning if you knew how to listen. Across the diner, a group of men laughed too loud at something that wasn't funny, and the dog's ears twitched, catching the strain beneath the sound. The vet noticed the same thing. The way one man's laugh didn't reach his eyes. The way another kept checking his phone like he was waiting for a signal. He took a slow sip, unhurried, but his posture tightened in a way you'd miss unless you'd seen it before. The quiet switch from off-duty to mission mode. Outside, the first real gust shoved powder off rooftops and swept it down the street in a pale sheet. And someone at the counter joked about a little weather, like weather had never hurt anyone. The vet didn't laugh. He glanced at his partner, and the canine stared back, still as a statue, as if it already smelled the storm that was coming. By late afternoon the next day, the wind had teeth, and the town moved the way it always did when weather threatened. Faster, quieter, eyes down, pretending the sky wasn't changing. The vet and his canine stopped at Harper's Corner Mart, the one place everyone passed through, whether they admitted it or not, a squat building with buzzing fluorescent lights and a bell that rang like a warning every time the door opened. Inside, the heater fought the cold and lost. So people kept their coats on while they bought milk and scratched tickets and talked about the forecast like it was gossip. The canine walked at the vet's knee, head low, scanning, paws silent on the scuffed tile. And it was the dog that noticed her first. Stillness in a corner that didn't belong. Near the postcard rack, a little girl stood alone, small as a shadow, wearing a jacket too thin for December, the zipper broken so it hung open at the throat. Her hands were bare, fingers mottled raw red like she'd been rubbing them for warmth too long, and she pressed them to her mouth in a desperate little breath and blow that did nothing against the bite in the air. Adults saw her. You could tell by the way their eyes snagged on her and then slid away, like looking too long would make them responsible. A woman with a basket paused, lips parting as if to ask a question, then remembered something and turned toward the checkout instead. Two teenagers glanced, whispered, and stepped aside like the girl might be contagious. The vet watched the social paralysis ripple through the store, everyone waiting for someone else to do the right thing. And he felt a familiar controlled fury tighten behind his ribs. The canine's ears tipped forward. It didn't bark, didn't move, just fixed on the child with that focused attention that meant problem found. The vet approached slowly, lowering his presence so he wouldn't tower over her. "Hey," he said gently, voice steady. "You waiting for someone?" The girl's eyes lifted, big and too careful, and for a moment she looked like she might answer. But then the bell chimed, and she flinched hard at the sound, shoulders jerking as if she expected a hand to come down from behind. The clerk behind the counter, An older man with a mustache and a perpetual grin noticed the vet's attention and called out, half laughing, "Don't worry about her, officer. She's fine." The vet didn't look away from the girl. "Who's she waiting on?" The clerk's grin tightened into something practiced and folksy, the tone people used when they wanted to end a conversation without sounding like they were hiding anything. "Her family's complicated," he said, waving a hand as if that explained frostbitten fingers and a child alone in a storm-threatened town. The word complicated hung in the air like smoke. The K9 shifted one paw, nails clicking once, and the sound made several customers glance over before quickly turning away again. The vet crouched, lower. He noticed the girl's cheeks were wind-chapped, her hair knotted like it hadn't been brushed in days, and there was a faint bruise-yellow shadow near her wrist where the sleeve had ridden up. "What's your name?" he asked. The girl swallowed, eyes darting toward the clerk, then toward the door, then to the K9, as if deciding whether the dog was safe. She started, then stopped when a man in a heavy coat stepped into line and the clerk greeted him too warmly. "Evening, Mr. Tarusk," the clerk said, voice suddenly respectful. At the name, the girl's whole body tightened, her chin tucked, shoulders curling inward like a turtle withdrawing into its shell. The vet caught that flinch like a snapped photograph. He didn't need the rest of the sentence. In a town like Maple Hollow, names carried weight, and that one, Rusk, rang like a door slamming somewhere you couldn't see. The vet rose, calm on the outside, and let his hand rest lightly on the K9's collar, feeling the dog's muscles coil under control. He looked from the girl, to the door, to the clerk's nervous smile, and he understood with chilling clarity. This wasn't a lost kid. This was a kid everyone had learned not to see. The vet didn't raise his voice, didn't flash authority like a weapon, because he'd learned long ago that loudness was what bullies wanted and what frightened people hid behind. Instead, he let the room keep breathing while he quietly changed its gravity. "Complicated doesn't answer my question," he said, still looking at the girl, keeping his tone level enough that no one could accuse him of making a scene. The clerk's smile faltered, and the man in the heavy coat, Mr. Rusk, turned slightly, just enough to show he was listening, just enough to remind everyone who held invisible strings in Maple Hollow. "She's waitin'," the clerk insisted, voice a shade sharper now. "And her folks don't want trouble. You know how it is." The vet nodded as if he understood, because he did. He understood exactly how it was when a town taught itself to look away. He shifted his stance so his body became a quiet barrier between the girl and the checkout line, a small act that felt accidental to anyone watching, but meant everything to a child who had learned to read danger in adult posture. "What's your address, sweetheart?" he asked softly. And when the girl's lips trembled, he didn't push, just offered another rung on the ladder. "Or your school?" The girl's eyes flicked again to Mr. Rusk, then dropped to the floor, and that was answer enough. The vet straightened, reached into his pocket, and paid for his coffee he hadn't finished. Because the fastest way to get people to relax was to act normal while you prepared to do the opposite. "We'll step outside for a second," he told the girl, not asking permission, but also not grabbing her, inviting her into safety without turning it into a tug-of-war. The clerk's hand rose, palm out. "Now hold on, officer. You don't need—" The vet cut him off with a single calm glance that said, "I'm not asking you." Then, as if it were the most casual thing in the world, he guided the girl toward the door, letting the K9 lead by half a step so the dog's presence formed a moving shield. The bell chimed again, and the wind knifed in, throwing a scatter of icy grains across the mat. Outside, the sky had turned the color of bruised steel, and the first real flakes spiraled down, slow and thick like ash. The vet's eyes swept the lot in one practiced arc. Vehicles, angles, blind spots. Then settled on a black pickup idling at the far end, headlights off, engine vibrating low. It didn't belong the way it was parked, nose angled toward the side alley instead of the entrance, as if ready to slip away. The K9 noticed it too. The dog's head lifted, nostrils flaring, gaze locking on the pickup with a stillness that felt like a warning sign. The vet didn't stare back at it. Staring was a challenge. But he logged it, the way you log a weapon on the table. He ushered the girl toward the wall of the building where the wind was weaker, then crouched to her level again. "You're cold," he said, stating the obvious because sometimes the obvious was a lifeline. He slipped off his own gloves and gently pulled them onto her hands. They were too big. The fingers flopped. The girl looked at him like she didn't understand gifts without strings. "What's his name?" the vet asked. And though he didn't say the name out loud, the question aimed straight at the flinch he'd seen. The girl's throat bobbed. I can't," she whispered, eyes wide. "He said—" She stopped, biting the words back as if they were dangerous to hold. The vet's jaw tightened once, then smoothed. "Okay," he said. "Then you don't." He stood and turned his body just enough to block her from the line of sight of the lot, then pressed his radio mic with his thumb, shielding it from the wind. "Dispatch, this is K9 unit," he said, voice steady, procedural, the way you spoke when you wanted the record to exist. "Requesting a welfare check. Juvenile female, unattended, possible neglect. Location Harper's Corner Mart." There was a pause, a crackle, and then the dispatcher's response came slower than it should have. A slight drag of hesitation that made the vet's stomach drop. "Copy, welfare request," she said, like the words tasted wrong. The vet stared past the storefront to the side of the building, to a back door half hidden by stacked crates and a leaning pallet. The K9's gaze had moved there now, fixed on that door with a focus so intense it looked like the dog could see through the metal. The vet felt the hairs on his neck rise, not from the cold, but from the sense of eyes behind walls. He guided the girl a step closer to him, subtle, protective, and without looking back at the idling pickup, he memorized the plate anyway. Then he made his next move the same way he made all the dangerous ones, quietly, cleanly, and with the certainty that if the local system wouldn't protect this child, he would. The vet did what the rulebook demanded first, because procedure was a shield when towns tried to turn you into the villain for asking questions, and he wanted every step to leave footprints no blizzard could erase. He guided the girl back inside only long enough to get her out of the wind, positioning her at a corner table where the security camera could see her face and where his own body blocked the line of sight from the checkout and the door. Then he asked the clerk, politely and firmly, for any information on file. Guardian name, emergency contact, anything, while the K9 lay down at the girl's feet like a quiet wall. The clerk fumbled with a stack of papers by the register, all trembling hands and false helpfulness, producing nothing but a crumpled receipt pad and a shrug. "She don't have nothing here," he insisted, eyes darting to the back room as if seeking permission from someone unseen. The vet didn't argue. He stepped away and called in again, this time requesting a unit to respond in person. The dispatcher's voice returned with that same thin hesitation. "K9 unit, I've got your request," she said. "But there's a delay. Patrol is tied up." "Tied up where?" the vet asked, still calm. Silence crackled. "Weather prep," she finally offered, and it landed wrong because weather prep didn't take every available unit on a weekday afternoon. The vet opened his tablet in the booth, pulled up the county welfare portal, and tried to run the girl's name from the tiny whisper she'd managed. An initial and a last name she mouthed like a secret. The system spun, then returned an error. He tried again. A blank profile, no address, no school record. Like she'd never existed on paper, which meant someone had erased her, or never allowed her to be written down in the first place. That wasn't messy neglect. That was deliberate. He placed a call to the on-duty supervisor, Sergeant Mallory, local born and raised. The kind of man who could shake every hand at the church fundraiser and still forget your name if you weren't useful. Mallory answered on the third ring with a sigh that sounded annoyed before the conversation even began. "Yeah?" "Sarge?" the vet said, keeping his voice even. "I've got an unattended juvenile at Harper's Corner. No gloves, inadequate clothing, signs of neglect. I put in a welfare request. I need a unit, and I need a CPS contact." A pause. Then Mallory chuckled like this was an inconvenience dressed up as concern. "Harper's? You sure she ain't just waiting on family?" "I'm sure," the vet replied, eyes on the girl's raw hands as she clutched his borrowed gloves like they were life preservers. "Run her through the system," Mallory said. And when the vet told him it came back blank, Mallory's tone shifted into something smoother, practiced. "Look," he said, lowering his voice, "you're new enough around here to not know all the currents. Some folks got complicated situations. You start stirring it, you'll make it worse for the kid." The vet felt the words for what they were, an old trick, turning protection into a threat. "Complicated isn't a legal category," he said quietly. "Neglect is." Mallory exhaled like a man humoring a stubborn dog. "Listen," he said, "this isn't your fight. Let it go. You know who's tied up in that family? Mr. Rusk. He's a donor, keeps the Little League afloat, pays for half the winter fuel vouchers. You think county's gonna thank you for dragging his name through the mud?" The diner chatter of the store seemed to dim around the vet, as if the whole building leaned in to hear how far he'd push. Protected neglect, he thought, the phrase forming cold and sharp in his mind. A child falling through the cracks didn't happen when cracks were accidents. It happened when someone built them on purpose. The K9 lifted its head, ears pricking, eyes tracking toward the front windows again. And the vet followed the dog's focus to the black pickup still idling at the far edge of the lot, a silhouette in gathering snow. He stood, moving to the window without making it obvious, and photographed the plate with his phone. The click hidden under the cashier's drawer slam. "Sarge," he said, "I'm documenting this. I'm filing the report. I need a CPS number now." Mallory's voice tightened. "You file whatever you want," he said, "but don't expect backup to sprint over. Weather's coming. You keep that kid warm and let her people handle her." The vet's gaze slid to the girl again, her small shoulders, her careful silence, and he understood exactly what her people meant. He ended the call without a goodbye and dialed the county welfare hotline directly, thumb steady, pulse hard. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then clicked, connected. A woman's voice began, "County services, how can I—" And then, mid-word, the audio stuttered, the line hissed, and the call went dead. The vet stared at his phone screen as if it had betrayed him, and outside the window, the black pickup's headlights finally flicked on. Snow came in sheets, fat flakes turning the parking lot into a spinning white tunnel. And the moment the black pickup's headlights flared, the vet felt the town's invisible hand tighten. He turned back to the booth, 1 second to check on the girl, and found only his borrowed gloves on the vinyl seat. The air smelled of coffee and melting slush, but underneath was something sharper, like panic. Her chair was turned, as if she'd slid out fast, and a wet footprint marked the tile near the back aisle. The vet's jaw set. People nearby pretended not to notice, staring at Chip, bags and bright lottery posters. His stomach dropped. He scanned postcard rack, candy aisle, restroom door, the back hallway by the storeroom. The clerk kept his hands busy without doing anything, eyes sliding away. The K9 was up, ears forward, nose working, staring at the rear exit as if it had heard a quiet command behind the walls. "Where is she?" the vet asked, voice low. "Ain't seen her," the clerk said too quickly, and that was the tell. The vet hit his radio. "Dispatch, juvenile missing from Harper's. Initiate search." Static, then a slow reply. "Copy, will advise units." Not, "We're on the way." Not, "Tell me last seen." Just words, like a form being filled. Outside, cruisers rolled in with lights on, but no urgency in the doors. Officers moving as if the storm was the real problem and the child was paperwork. They fanned out near the entrance, calling half-heartedly into the wind, flashlights waving like theater. The vet felt the minutes sliding away, each one another layer of snow covering tracks. "I'm not waiting," he said, clipping the leash shorter. He stepped into the blizzard, and it hit like a wall. Wind roaring, snow stinging his cheeks, flashlight beam swallowed after 10 feet. The K9 pulled, not frantic, just sure, dragging him past the obvious search line and toward the side alley beside the building. The vet followed, boots crunching through fresh drifts. And there, half buried near the dumpsters, was a small pink hair clip shaped like a star, its plastic rimmed with ice. He picked it up, held it to the light, and his chest tightened. It was the kind of thing a kid clutched when she wanted to feel seen. The K9 sniffed it once and surged forward, nose down, tail stiff, tracking through a narrow gap between the mart and the adjoining hardware shed. The dog led him to a drainage culvert where meltwater ran under the road, now choked with snow. And the K9's posture changed, low, intense, head angled into the dark as if the tunnel itself breathed fear. The vet swung his light and caught a second set of prints, small, uneven, stumbling, heading toward the wood line, already filling in. Far off, an engine revved once and faded, and the vet realized the storm wasn't just weather tonight. It was cover. He tightened his grip on the leash, felt the K9 lean forward like coiled power, and stepped after those vanishing footprints into the trees. Because if the town wouldn't move, he would. The trees swallowed sound, turning the blizzard into a muffled roar, and the vet's flashlight beam skittered across trunks and whipping branches like a frantic metronome. Snow clung to his lashes and melted down his face, and every breath tasted like iron. But the K9 moved with a steadiness that made the chaos feel organized. Nose low, paws certain, tugging him through drifts that reached the dog's chest without hesitation. The trail was faint, half erased already, yet the K9 followed it as if it were painted in light. The stumble of small boots, the drag of a heel, the sudden knee drop where a child had fallen and forced herself up again. The vet's pulse hammered in his ears, not from exertion, but from the awful arithmetic of cold and time. And he kept speaking softly, not to the dog, but to the darkness, as if words could keep the world from closing. "Hang on," he murmured. "Just hang on." The K9 cut right toward a shallow depression between two boulders where the wind hit less hard. And there she was, curled on her side in a hollow like the earth had tried to hide her, hair damp and frozen into stringy ribbons, cheeks waxy, lips tinged blue. Her jacket was dusted white, Her bare fingers were tucked under her chin in a child's instinctive attempt to keep warmth. And the sight slammed into the vet with controlled fury, so sharp it steadied him. He dropped to his knees in the snow, gloves already wet, and reached for her shoulders to lift her into his coat. "Hey," he said, voice gentle and urgent. "I've got you. You're safe. Stay with me." The girl's eyelids fluttered once, unfocused, and she made a tiny sound like a breath caught on a thorn. The vet slid an arm beneath her carefully, ready to hoist her and run. But the K9 stepped in, body blocking his motion with quiet authority. For a split second, the vet's instincts flared. Move, evacuate, now. But the dog wasn't panicking. It was making a choice. The K9 lowered itself beside the girl with controlled precision. Then, shockingly, eased down over her, curling its full weight around her small body like a living blanket. The dog's rib cage rose and fell against her, warm and steady. And it pressed its chest to her back, sealing her into a pocket of heat. Its head stayed up, eyes scanning the trees, ears swiveling, posture not soft but vigilant. The vet understood in a flash. The K9 wasn't refusing the lift. It was stabilizing, locking in body heat, guarding, signaling, a trained protector using the only shelter it could build in a blizzard. "Good," the vet breathed, awe cutting through fear. He slid his coat off and draped it over both of them, tucking the edges tight to trap warmth, then keyed his radio with shaking fingers. "K9 unit to dispatch. Found the juvenile. Repeat, found her," he said, forcing his voice to stay procedural. "Severe exposure. Send EMS to my GPS, now." Static answered, then a delayed, too-flat acknowledgement. But the vet didn't wait for comfort. He blew a sharp whistle, one of his recall signals, hoping any nearby searchers might hear. Through the trees faintly, a human voice called back, then another, and a flashlight beam bobbed closer like a distant star. A bundled passerby, drawn by the sirens and the storm, had followed at a distance and now stood at the edge of the hollow. Phone already raised with trembling hands. "Oh my God," the person whispered, and the camera caught it all. The blizzard swirling like smoke, the little girl motionless under the draped coat, and the police K9 curled around her with eyes open, alert, working. The vet didn't tell them to stop recording because some truths needed a witness, and because he had a sinking feeling the town would try to bury this if it could. The K9 let out one clean bark, sharp, controlled, like a flare shot into the night. As more lights approached, the vet lifted his gaze beyond the hollow, scanning for anything that didn't belong. That's when he saw them. A second set of adult footprints, larger, deliberate, cutting across the ridge above the girl's shelter and heading deeper into the woods. Too fresh to be old search tracks, too purposeful to be random, leading somewhere they shouldn't. Warm light made lies easier to tell, and in Maple Hollow, the warmest light wasn't in Rosie's diner or the church hall. It was in the private room behind Rusk Development's community office. A renovated storefront with polished wood and framed photos of ribbon cuttings that smelled faintly of cologne and fresh paint. While the blizzard clawed at the town outside, 4 men sat around a table that looked too expensive for a place that claimed to run on donations, their faces lit by a brass lamp that turned every shadow soft and forgiving. Gerald Rusk sat at the head, relaxed in the way only powerful people could be relaxed during an emergency. Fingers steepled, a smile that never reached his eyes. "Let's not be dramatic," he said, voice smooth as warm syrup, as if a child freezing in the woods was an inconvenience, not a crisis. "We're dealing with optics, and optics can be managed." Beside him, Sergeant Mallory cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable but not surprised. the posture of a man who'd been inside this room before. Another figure, thin, suited, county level, kept glancing at his phone, already fielding calls that hadn't hit the public yet. A fourth man, broad-shouldered with a bulldog jaw, said nothing. Just watched the door like a guard dog with a paycheck. Rusk leaned forward, tapping the tabletop once, a quiet command that made the others listen. "That K9 handler," he said. "The vet. He doesn't understand the arrangement. He's new to our ecosystem." He said ecosystem the way you'd say family, the way you'd say we take care of our own. Mallory shifted. "He's making noise," he admitted. "He filed a welfare request. He called county services." Rusk's smile thinned. "Yes." And the line went dead, he said, as if discussing a minor technical correction. The suited man finally looked up. "We can slow walk any paperwork," he offered, eager to be useful. "Missing forms, misfiled reports. With the storm, we have cover for delays." Rusk nodded, satisfied, then glanced at the framed photo behind him. Himself shaking hands with a state senator, a caption about public-private partnership. "This town survives because we keep the funding intact," he said. "The Little League, the fuel vouchers, the scholarship fund. People need those stories to believe in. If this turns into a scandal, everyone loses. So we do what adults do. We prevent the scandal." Mallory's voice lowered. "The kid was supposed to stay quiet," he muttered. The bulldog-jawed man's lips twitched, almost a grin. Rusk's eyes hardened, and for a moment the warm light couldn't soften what lived behind them. "She's tied to a situation that keeps certain people cooperative," Rusk said, choosing words like a lawyer choosing loopholes. "A custody matter, a signature that went the right way. A mother who stopped asking questions because she remembered what happened the last time she did. You call it messy. I call it resolved." The suited man swallowed. "And now she's out there," he said, as if the storm had spat her onto the stage. Rusk leaned back, palms open, the posture of reason. "She was never meant to be seen," he said. "That's the whole point of don't ask questions. And yet someone asked questions." Mallory looked away. "The handler found her," he said, "and someone filmed it. I saw a clip, just a few seconds. K9 wrapped around her. It's the kind of thing people share." Rusk's fingers stopped tapping. "Exactly," he replied, voice still calm but now edged with steel. "A story like that doesn't stay local. It goes national. It goes international. It becomes a symbol. And symbols are dangerous because they invite outsiders who don't understand our needs." He nodded toward the bulldog-jawed man. "Contain it," he said, "before it spreads." The man's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and nodded once. "Already working on it," he said. Rusk turned to Mallory, warmth returning like a mask sliding back into place. "You'll do your part?" he said gently. And it wasn't a question. Mallory's shoulders sank. "Yeah," he whispered. Rusk's gaze moved to the suited man. "And you," he said, "will make sure the official story is clean. Weather incident, family misunderstanding, heroic rescue. No mention of neglect, no mention of names." He paused, then delivered the order like a verdict. "Find out who recorded that," he said, each word precise. Now. By morning, the storm had moved on, but left its fingerprints everywhere. Drifts piled like barricades, power lines sagging, and a town-wide hush that felt less like relief and more like a decision. The girl was in the county hospital under heated blankets, monitored and silent. And the vet stood outside the room while nurses worked, his canine sitting at his heel, with frost still clinging to its whiskers like a badge. He should have felt the release of found alive. But instead, a heavier dread settled in, because survival didn't end the story. It started the fight over who got to control it. The first call came from Sergeant Mallory, curt and clipped. "Hand over your body cam data. Now, chain of custody." The vet's eyes narrowed. "I'll submit it through evidence like protocol says," he replied. Mallory's pause was a warning. "Just do it," he insisted, and the vet heard the unspoken part. "Before someone else takes it from you." In the waiting area, the passerby who'd recorded the K9, curled around the girl, sat hunched with a coffee they weren't drinking, phone in both hands like it might explode. Their footage had already begun to circulate, shared in local groups, then reposted beyond the county, the title forming itself in bold, emotional language that made people stop scrolling. And that was exactly why the town's invisible hand moved so fast. A man in a nice coat approached the witness near the vending machines, smiled too warmly, and murmured something that made the witness's face drain. The vet caught only fragments: property, trespassing, interference, threats dressed up as polite advice. The witness glanced at the vet with pleading eyes, then looked away like they were ashamed for needing help. A nurse passed by and whispered, "They're saying you went rogue," not meeting his gaze. "They're saying you stole a kid, staged the whole thing for attention." The vet's stomach tightened, not because the rumor was clever, but because it was familiar. Discredit the protector, isolate the witness, bury the evidence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout his innocence into a hallway full of people trained to avoid trouble. He stepped into a quiet corner and made calls the right way. County CPS supervisor, state hotline, internal affairs. Only to hit voicemail, reroutes, "We'll get back to you." And one chilling repetition: "Weather event. No further action at this time." It was protected neglect wearing a new coat. When he returned to his cruiser to check his secured evidence pouch, he found a sticky note tucked under his wiper. "Stop digging." No signature, no need. The K9 sniffed it once and gave a low, restrained growl that never escalated. A professional warning aimed at the unseen. The vet drove home under gray skies with the K9 in the back seat, senses sharpened to the smallest anomalies, the sedan that stayed behind him too long, the way the radio went quiet on his usual channel, the sudden absence of friendly waves from neighbors. At his driveway, he noticed a tire track that wasn't his, cutting across the edge of his lawn like someone had tested how close they could get. Inside, he checked his locks, fed the K9, and set his evidence case on the table without letting it leave his sight. That was when the knock came. Soft, almost respectful. He opened the door to a woman he recognized from dispatch. Lena, a night shift operator with tired eyes and hands that shook like she'd been holding guilt for too long. She didn't step inside until he nodded. And even then she kept her coat on, as if she might have to run. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, gaze flicking to the dark windows. "But you called last night." The line went dead because someone killed it. Not the storm, not a glitch. The vet's face stayed composed, but something in him went cold and clear. "Do you have proof?" he asked. Lena swallowed, reached into her bag, and pulled out a small, sealed evidence envelope. Unofficial, unmarked except for a handwritten time and date. Inside was a flash drive. "Dispatch logs," she said, voice cracking. "Timestamps, call routing, and—" She hesitated, then added, "a recording. The supervisor line." the part they don't want anyone to hear. The kind of evidence that didn't argue. It ended arguments. The vet took it carefully, like it might burn, and for the first time since the diner, he felt the first domino lean. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. Lena's eyes filled but didn't spill. "Because she's a kid," she said, "and because I'm tired of pretending I didn't hear things." The vet nodded once, grateful without indulging it. He pulled out his phone and typed a single message to the one higher-level contact he trusted outside Maple Hollow's web. An old colleague now with the state agency. A number he hadn't used in years. Need immediate oversight. Child neglect covered by local authority. Evidence attached. Do not route through county. He hit send. The message delivered. And at that exact moment, the canine's head snapped toward the living room window. Body going still, ears forward. The vet followed the dog's gaze and saw it too. Headlights blooming at the end of his driveway, bright and steady, not turning around. Just sitting there in the falling dusk, like someone had come to make sure he understood the cost of pushing back. The headlights at the end of the driveway didn't flash or honk. They simply stayed. A silent statement that made the night feel smaller. And the vet stood behind his living room curtain with the canine pressed close at his leg, both of them listening to the engine idle like a patient predator. He didn't step outside to confront it, because confrontation was what they wanted. Something they could twist into unstable, aggressive, rogue. So he did the one thing Power hated most. He documented. He lifted his phone, filmed the vehicle's position, zoomed on the plate, recorded the time, then backed away, lights off, breathing slow. 10 minutes later, the car rolled out, tires crunching ice, disappearing as if it had never been there. But the message remained. By dawn the next day, Maple Hollow's message was drowned out by a louder one. Because the witness's shaky footage had leapt beyond local gossip and into the bloodstream of the internet. It hit feeds in the early hours under the same blunt headline that made people stop mid-scroll. Little girl found sleeping with police dog in snow. The story behind it went viral worldwide. The clip was raw, cinematic, unforgettable. Snow spinning like smoke, the child's small form barely visible beneath a coat, and the canine curled around her with eyes open, alert, working, like a living promise that someone would not let her freeze. Comment sections ignited with outrage and awe, then with questions. Why was she out there? Where were the adults? Why did the dog have to be the one to keep her alive? Morning shows replayed it. International pages reposted it with translations. Strangers offered donations, legal help, foster support. And when enough strangers looked in the same direction, even a protected town couldn't keep its curtains drawn. The vet's higher-level contact called back with one sentence that sounded like the first crack in ice. "Do not touch your evidence. State investigators are en route." By midday, unmarked SUVs and a state EMS oversight vehicle rolled into Maple Hollow, tires throwing slush like punctuation. And suddenly Sergeant Mallory's authority shrank in the presence of badges that didn't owe him favors. Agents asked for dispatch logs. They asked for the dead hotline call. They asked about the missing paperwork. Lena's flash drive didn't argue. It spoke in timestamps and routing codes and voices that had forgotten they could be recorded. The witness, who'd been threatened, was interviewed in a protected room. The vet's body cam data, secured and intact, entered chain of custody under external hands. And when the first warrant was served, it hit like thunder through a town used to whispers. The bulldog-jawed enforcer was taken first, cuffs clicking in a driveway, while neighbors watched from behind blinds, the sound of justice finally loud enough to be heard. Then came Mallory, pulled aside in his own station, face flushed with shock as if he couldn't believe the rules applied to him too. Rumors evaporated when the state's press statement landed. Active investigation into obstruction, child endangerment, and evidence tampering. The next domino was heavier. Gerald Rusk. The man who smiled through ribbon cuttings now faced cameras without warmth, guided into a vehicle as reporters shouted questions he couldn't wave away with donations. Did you order the call dropped? Did you threaten the witness? Why was the child undocumented? Maple Hollow's old power tried to hold shape, but public pressure and documented proof snapped it. In the hospital, the little girl finally spoke her full name to a social worker who listened like every syllable mattered. And she reached for the canine's fur with hands that were healing, fingers no longer raw red, but still small and brave. The vet stood nearby, not claiming credit, just holding space like a shield. When the canine saw her safe, truly safe, surrounded by people who couldn't be bought, its posture softened for the first time in days, shoulders easing, eyelids lowering, the coiled power unspooling into quiet relief. Weeks later, the town looked the same but felt different. As if the air had been scrubbed, people showed up at meetings and asked hard questions out loud, the kind they'd swallowed for years. The diner bell chimed and conversations didn't die. They turned toward truth. The witness who filmed the rescue wasn't shamed anymore. They were thanked. Lena wasn't a ghost in dispatch. She was a name in a report that mattered. And on a morning when the sun finally returned, the vet walked the canine down Maple Hollow Road, past snowbanks melting into rivulets, each drip a small surrender of winter, and the last image was simple. Water sliding off the canine's dark fur in shining beads, the storm finally letting go, the town finally thawing, and a child's laughter, faint but real, carrying into the cold air like the start of something repaired.